Loyalty is a luxury, easily afforded in times of peace, the old saying goes. But what happens when the first shot shatters the glass, and the elite extraterrestrial warriors bred for centuries to be the ultimate shield break and run? Blood pooled on the polished marble floors of the Geneva diplomatic compound as Queen Beatrice watched her royal detail flee to the extraction shuttles, abandoning her to the mercy of a heavily armed hit squad. She closed her eyes, waiting for the executioner's blast. Instead, she heard the harsh, metallic clack of a human weapon racking around. Standing between a fallen monarch and an army of killers was a single human security contractor, bleeding, outgunned, but refusing to yield a single inch. The air inside the Palais des Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, was heavy, with the sterile scent of ozone and the unspoken weight of history. For humanity, this was the most critical day of the 21st century. The Elysians, an advanced spacefaring civilization that had made first contact only 3 years prior, were here to sign the Sol System Non-Aggression and Trade Pact. Through the localized neural translation matrix, their names and titles were adapted into familiar Western equivalents to ease diplomatic relations. At the center of the delegation was Queen Beatrice, the sovereign ruler of the Elysian ascendancy. She was a striking figure, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with pale, luminescent skin and features that were sharply, almost aggressively elegant. Draped in ceremonial robes of woven metallic fibers, she looked every bit the absolute monarch. Surrounding her was the royal aegis, a dozen towering guards clad in seamless reactive armor suits. They were led by Captain Bradford, a warrior whose translated name belied his alien arrogance. Bradford and his men possessed a biological superiority complex that they barely bothered to hide. To them, humans were fragile, primitive creatures who relied on combustion-based ballistics and brute force rather than refined energy fields. Standing a quiet 50 feet away from the main dais, Sergeant Cole Dempsey watched the proceedings with the detached, sweeping gaze of a career soldier. Dempsey was a former ranger, now pulling a lucrative but mind-numbing contract for Constellation Security Solutions, a private military corporation hired to augment the United Nations perimeter defense. He was dressed in low-profile tactical gear, the weight of his customized Heckler & Koch HK 416 assault rifle resting familiarly against his chest. "Look at them," Corporal Miller whispered through the encrypted comms channel in Dempsey's earpiece. "Bradford's guys act like we're local wildlife that might bite if they get too close." "Stow it, Miller," Dempsey murmured, his voice barely a rasp over the comms. "They're paying us to stand here and look menacing, not to critique their manners. Keep your eyes on Sector 4. The crowd outside is getting restless." The protests outside the Palais had been growing for weeks. Anti-alien integration groups, fueled by xenophobic rhetoric and shadowy funding, had sworn to disrupt the treaty. But Dempsey wasn't worried about the protesters with their cardboard signs. He was looking for the absence of normal behavior, the slight shifts in the room, the unblinking stares, the hands resting too close to waistbands. Queen Beatrice stepped up to the massive obsidian table, a custom-forged stylus in her elegant, four-fingered hand. The UN Secretary-General smiled, gesturing to the document. "With this signature, our peoples step into a shared future," the Secretary-General announced, his voice echoing through the grand hall. Beatrice offered a slight, regal nod. "For peace and the mutual prosperity of our worlds." She lowered the stylus. Before the ink could touch the parchment, the massive reinforced skylights of the Palais des Nations detonated. It wasn't a standard explosive. It was a localized electromagnetic pulse coupled with a hypersonic shockwave. The glass didn't just break, it vaporized into a lethal storm of microscopic shrapnel. The EMP washed over the room in a sickening wave of blue light. Instantly, the lights died. The hum of the UN's advanced holographic displays winked out. More importantly, the shimmering, impenetrable energy shields of the Elysian Royal Aegis collapsed into sparks. "Contact! We have contact!" Dempsey roared, instantly dropping to a knee and snapping his rifle to his shoulder as the ceiling descended into chaos. From the shattered skylights, operators descended on tactical fast ropes. They weren't ragtag protesters. They wore unmarked, matte black ballistic armor and carried compact thermal plasma carbines. At their head was a man Dempsey recognized from intelligence briefings. General Richter, a disgraced former military commander turned mercenary, who had publicly vowed to prevent humanity from bowing to the alien crown. The room erupted into absolute carnage. Richter's mercenaries hit the floor in perfect tactical synchronization. Before the UN dignitaries could even scream, the crackle of plasma fire tore through the room. Searing bolts of superheated energy struck the marble, vaporizing chunks of stone and flesh alike. "Protect the Queen!" Captain Bradford shouted, his synthesized voice cracking with unprecedented panic. For the first time in his life, his invulnerable shield was gone. He was exposed, just like the primitive humans he despised. Dempsey squeezed the trigger of his HK 416. The heavy 5.56 millimeters rounds barked, dropping the first two mercenaries to touch the floor before they could unclip from their ropes. Double tap to the chest. Transition. Double tap. The muscle memory of 100 firefights in the Middle East and Eastern Europe took over. "Miller, lay down suppressive fire. Get the UN VIPs to the underground tunnels," Dempsey ordered, ejecting a spent magazine and slamming a fresh one home in under 2 seconds. But the assault was overwhelming. Richter had brought overwhelming firepower. Thermal detonators rolled across the floor, concussive blasts throwing delegates into the air. Through the smoke and blood spray, Dempsey kept his eyes on the primary asset, Queen Beatrice. She had been knocked backward by a blast. Her ceremonial robe scorched. She struggled to rise, her breath hitching in a panic she had never known. She reached out toward Captain Bradford. "Bradford! The defensive formation!" she commanded, her voice trembling but authoritative. Bradford looked at the Queen, then at the advancing line of heavily armed mercenaries, cutting down the remaining UN security. He looked at his own armor, realizing a single plasma bolt would sear straight through his flesh. The alien captain, a warrior from a society that fought with absolute technological supremacy, had no concept of a fighting retreat or holding a desperate line. When the math of survival turned against him, the protocol was preservation of the military asset himself. "The Sovereign is compromised. Fall back to the atmospheric shuttles. Evacuate!" Bradford screamed. Beatrice's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. "Captain, you cannot abandon me." But they did. In a display of cowardice that defied every legend of the Elysian royal aegis, Aknir, towering armored guards turned their backs on their monarch. They activated their boot thrusters, which had been shielded from the EMP, and launched themselves toward the shattered roof, fleeing into the chaotic Geneva sky and leaving the Queen completely alone on the dais. General Richter stepped through the smoke, a predatory grin on his scarred face. "Well, look at that. Even the gods run when they bleed. Take her alive if you can. If not, her corpse will send the same message." 3 mercenaries raised their weapons, advancing on the defenseless Queen. Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut. She was an aristocrat, a ruler, not a soldier. She prepared her mind for the final, agonizing burn of plasma. Crack, crack, crack. The 3 mercenaries dropped simultaneously, their helmets shattered by precise, armor-piercing rounds. Richter cursed, diving behind a collapsed pillar as a hail of lead tore through the space where he had just been standing. Queen Beatrice opened her eyes. Standing over her was not an Elysian warrior, but a human. Sergeant Cole Dempsey stood resolute, his rifle tucked tight against his shoulder, his eyes cold and focused. Blood was dripping from a shrapnel wound on his forehead, staining his tactical vest, but his stance was immovable. "You," Beatrice whispered, utterly bewildered. "Why did you not run with the others?" Dempsey didn't look down at her. He kept his sights downrange, firing a quick burst that kept Richter's men pinned. "In my unit, Your Highness, we don't leave people behind," Dempsey grunted. "Can you walk?" My leg is injured. The blast." "Right. Plan B it is." Dempsey slung his rifle over his back, reached down, and hoisted the 7-foot-tall alien monarch to her feet. She was surprisingly light, her bone density different from a human's. He threw her arm over his shoulder. "We're moving to the subterranean bunker. Stay low, and whatever you do, don't stop moving." "They will kill us," she breathed, leaning heavily against the human contractor. "They can certainly try," Dempsey replied. He drew his Glock 19 sidearm with his free hand. "Hold tight." The corridors beneath the Palais des Nations were a labyrinth of concrete and steel, originally designed during the Cold War. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, casting long, erratic shadows as Dempsey dragged the Queen through the narrow halls. Behind them, the muffled echoes of plasma fire and heavy boots confirmed that Richter's kill squad was in relentless pursuit. "In here," Dempsey barked, kicking open a heavy reinforced steel door marked Security Sub-Basement 4. He shoved Beatrice inside and slammed the door shut, throwing the massive manual deadbolts into place. The room was a dead end, an old communications hub. It had one door in and no way out except a reinforced ventilation shaft that was far too small for the Queen to fit through. They were cornered. Beatrice collapsed against the cold concrete wall, clutching her bleeding leg. Her luminous blue blood stained her hands. "We are trapped," she stated, her voice devoid of hope. "Bradford took the aerial route. They will report me dead. No rescue will come." "Rescue is a bonus, not a requirement," Dempsey muttered. He immediately went to work. He wasn't panicking. He was calculating. He dropped his tactical backpack onto a metal desk and began pulling out gear. First, he grabbed a medical kit. He knelt beside the Queen, ripping open the scorched fabric of her robe. "What are you doing?" she gasped, flinching away from him. "Stopping the bleed. Hold still." Dempsey pulled out a packet of quick-clot combat gauze. He didn't know Elysian anatomy, but he knew plumbing. A hole was a hole. He packed the gauze aggressively into the wound. Beatrice let out a sharp, piercing shriek of pain. "Sorry, Your Highness. It burns, but it stops the bleeding." He quickly wrapped a pressure dressing around her thigh, securing it tight. Beatrice panted, looking at the crude but effective human medical supplies. "Your species? You endure this regularly?" "More than we'd like to admit," Dempsey said, standing up and moving toward the door. He had roughly 3 minutes before Richter's men blew the locks. Dempsey pulled 2 M18 Claymore mines from his pack. He set them up in a cross pattern facing the doorway, running the clackers back behind a heavy steel server rack. "Get behind the desk, keep your head down, and cover your ears," Dempsey instructed, checking the magazine of his HK 416. He had 2 30-round mags left. After that, it was the Glock, and after that, his combat knife. "You are just one soldier," Beatrice said, staring at him. "They have a small army. My own guards, the greatest warriors in my empire, determined the statistical probability of survival was 0. Why do you stay?" Dempsey paused, looking back at her. The dirt and blood on his face made him look like a phantom from humanity's violent past, a stark contrast to her elegant, refined existence. "Because I gave my word when I took this job," Dempsey said simply, "and because bullies like Richter need to learn that math doesn't mean a damn thing when a human draws a line in the sand." A heavy, rhythmic thud echoed from the other side of the steel door. They were setting breaching charges. Dempsey took his position behind the server rack, raising his rifle. He took a slow, deep breath, regulating his heart rate. "Cover your ears, Queen Beatrice. It's about to get loud." Boom. The steel door was blown inward off its hinges, flying across the room in a cloud of smoke and pulverized concrete. Before the dust could even settle, tactical flashlights cut through the gloom as Richter's mercenaries poured into the fatal funnel of the doorway. Dempsey didn't hesitate. He squeezed the clacker. The 2 Claymore mines detonated with a deafening roar, sending thousands of steel ball bearings shredding through the doorway. The front line of the assault force was instantly decimated, their armor useless against the sheer kinetic force at point-blank range. Screams echoed in the corridor. "Push through! Kill them!" Richter's voice roared from down the hall. The second wave stepped over their fallen comrades, firing blindly into the room. Plasma bolts melted the concrete around Dempsey, superheating the air. He leaned out from behind the server rack, his rifle barking in controlled 3-round bursts. He didn't waste a single bullet. Every trigger pull found a gap in the armor under the arm, the neck, the visor. Click. Empty. Dempsey dropped the empty mag, slammed his last one in, and kept firing. He caught a grazing plasma bolt to his left shoulder. The intense heat cauterized the flesh instantly, sending a blinding wave of agony through his nervous system. Dempsey grunted, his vision blurring for a fraction of a second, but his finger never left the trigger. He leaned heavily against the metal rack, using it to stabilize his aim as his left arm went numb. Beatrice watched from behind the desk, utterly mesmerized and terrified. She watched this frail human, bleeding and burning, refuse to take a single step backward. In her culture, pain was to be avoided at all costs. To see a creature use pain as fuel, converting adrenaline and agony into a hyper-focused will to kill, was terrifyingly beautiful. "Throw a frag! Flush him out!" a mercenary yelled. A small spherical grenade bounced into the room, rolling toward the desk where the queen was hiding. Dempsey saw it. He didn't think. He dove out from behind his cover, exposing himself to the suppressing fire, and kicked the grenade violently back into the hallway. It detonated just outside the door, taking out 2 more attackers. But in the split second Dempsey was exposed, a mercenary raised his carbine. Zap! A plasma bolt caught Dempsey in the side of his tactical vest. The kinetic impact threw him backward, crashing hard against the concrete wall. He slid to the floor, gasping for air as his ribs cracked. The ceramic plating of his vest had taken the brunt of the heat, but the impact was devastating. Silence descended on the room, save for Dempsey's ragged breathing. Footsteps crunched on the debris. General Richter stepped through the ruined doorway, a smoking plasma pistol in his hand. He looked around the blood-soaked room, his eyes landing on the wounded queen, and then on the broken human soldier on the floor. "Impressive," Richter sneered, stepping over the bodies of his own men. "Truly, Sergeant, you made us bleed for it, but it ends here." He raised his pistol, pointing it directly at Queen Beatrice's head. Dempsey's eyes fluttered open. His vision was swimming, red at the edges. His rifle was out of reach. His left arm was useless. But as he looked at Richter, the fire in his chest flared one last time. Slowly, agonizingly, Dempsey's right hand moved to the holster at his hip. The air in the subterranean bunker was thick with the acrid stench of vaporized concrete, burnt copper, and the sharp metallic tang of human blood. General Richter stood victorious, the pristine black armor of his mercenary suit barely scuffed, a sharp contrast to the brutalized, bleeding form of Sergeant Cole Dempsey on the floor. Queen Beatrice pressed herself against the cold steel of the desk, her luminescent blue blood pooling around the crude human bandage Dempsey had applied to her leg. She looked from the barrel of Richter's plasma pistol to the shattered human soldier who had given everything to buy her an extra 3 minutes of life. Richter chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that echoed in the devastated room. He didn't immediately pull the trigger. Like all men who believed they had engineered the perfect checkmate, he wanted his victim to understand the board. "You fought well, Sergeant," Richter sneered, stepping closer, his combat boots crunching over the shattered remains of a server rack. A textbook delaying action. The boys at Fort Benning would be proud. But loyalty to a paycheck only goes so far against superior firepower. Dempsey didn't speak. Every breath was a jagged knife in his chest, his ribs grating against his punctured lungs. His vision swam with gray static, but his right hand remained stubbornly wrapped around the grip of his Glock 19, resting uselessly against his hip. He needed Richter to keep talking. He needed the man to take 2 more steps to the left. "Why?" Beatrice asked, her voice trembling but retaining a sliver of her royal cadence. "If you kill me, the Ascendancy will burn your world to cinders. My royal aegis will return with an armada. This is suicide for your species." Richter laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He lowered his weapon slightly, looking at the queen with profound amusement. "Your aegis? The ones who fled at the first sign of an unshielded firefight? Please, your highness, do not insult my intelligence. And as for your armada, they aren't coming." Beatrice's ethereal features contorted in confusion. "You speak treason. You are a human mercenary. You know nothing of Elysian politics. I know that plasma weaponry doesn't grow on trees, and it certainly isn't sold at the local tactical surplus store," Richter replied smoothly, gesturing to the sleek, alien-designed carbines his dead men held. "Did you really think a disgraced human general managed to smuggle military-grade Elysian thermal plasma rifles into the Palais des Nations without a little inside help? The UN's perimeter security was tight, contracted out to the best private military firms. Constellation Security? Academy veterans, former JSOC operators. You don't bypass them with just a thick wallet. Beatrice's eyes widened as the realization struck her like a physical blow. The absolute perfection of the ambush. The specific targeting of the electromagnetic pulse that only disabled the Royal Aegis shields while leaving the mercenaries' gear intact. The immediate, coordinated flight of Captain Bradford and her elite guards. "Who?" she whispered, the word barely escaping her lips. "Lord Caldor," Richter said, using the translated Western name of her own uncle, the Minister of Defense. "He believes your integration policies with Earth make the Ascendancy look weak. He hired me to do the dirty work so your people's hands remain clean. Bradford was ordered to abandon you. You were dead the moment you stepped off your shuttle, Beatrice. I'm just the executioner." Beatrice stared into the gloom, her worldview fracturing. Her absolute monarchy, her genetically perfected guards, her sophisticated, enlightened civilization, it was all a facade. Beneath the shimmering shields and the claims of moral superiority, they were just as treacherous, just as bloody, and just as ruthless as the humans they looked down upon. The only creature in the entire galaxy who had stood by her was a scarred, bleeding human who was getting paid an hourly rate. 2 steps, Dempsey whispered. It was barely a rasp, a bloody bubble bursting at the corner of his mouth. "What was that, Sergeant?" Richter asked, glancing down at the broken contractor. "I said, you should have checked your corners," Dempsey gasped. In a fraction of a second, Dempsey's thumb flicked the safety off his Glock. But he didn't aim at Richter. At this angle, the mercenary's body armor would stop a 9mm round cold. Instead, Dempsey snapped his wrist to the left and fired 2 rapid shots into the shadows behind Richter. Crack, crack. The rounds struck the heavy, pressurized emergency fire suppression cylinder that Dempsey had intentionally positioned himself near when he was blown backward. The armor-piercing 9mm rounds punctured the reinforced valve. With a deafening shriek, the cylinder ruptured. Highly pressurized, freezing halon gas exploded outward in a blinding, violent white cloud. Richter screamed as the freezing gas hit his exposed face and the thermal sensors of his helmet, temporarily blinding him and throwing off his equilibrium. He blindly squeezed the trigger of his plasma pistol, the superheated bolt searing through the air inches above Dempsey's head and melting the concrete wall behind him. Dempsey didn't have the strength to stand. He didn't have the breath to fight, but he had the muscle memory of a United States Army Ranger. Using his good arm and his remaining leg strength, Dempsey launched his body across the floor. He tackled Richter at the knees, driving his shoulder into the mercenary's joints just as the man stumbled backward from the gas. Richter crashed to the concrete, dropping the plasma pistol as his hands flew out to catch his fall. Dempsey was instantly on top of him. The pain in his chest was absolute agony, a blinding white light threatening to pull him into unconsciousness. Richter was bigger, stronger, and uninjured. The mercenary snarled, driving a heavily armored fist into Dempsey's wounded shoulder. Dempsey roared, a primal sound of pure, unadulterated human stubbornness. He ignored the shattered bones in his shoulder. He ignored the blood filling his mouth. He drew his Ka-Bar combat knife from his chest rig with his right hand. Richter reached up, grabbing Dempsey's wrist, his cybernetically enhanced grip threatening to snap the human's bones. "You're dead, contractor! You're already dead!" Richter spat, fighting to push the blade away. "Maybe," Dempsey gritted out, his eyes locked onto Richter's, burning with a terrifying cold fury. "But you're coming with me." Dempsey shifted his weight, using gravity and the slick, blood-covered floor to his advantage. He let Richter push his right arm outward, but as he did, Dempsey violently twisted his body, driving his knee directly into Richter's groin while simultaneously slamming his forehead into the bridge of Richter's nose. The crunch of cartilage was loud, even over the hiss of the escaping gas. Richter's grip faltered for a microsecond. It was all Dempsey needed. He drove the Ka-Bar downward with every ounce of remaining strength, slipping the 7-inch high-carbon steel blade straight through the soft gap in Richter's tactical collar, severing the carotid artery and sinking deep into the mercenary's throat. Richter's eyes bulged. He let out a wet, gurgling sound, his hands frantically clawing at Dempsey's vest. But the human contractor held the knife steady, locking his elbow, pressing his weight down until the light finally faded from the traitorous general's eyes. Dempsey collapsed off the dead man, hitting the floor hard. He was suffocating. The room was spinning. He looked up toward the desk. Queen Beatrice was crawling toward him, her hands covered in dust and her own blue blood. She reached him, hovering over his face, her luminescent eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "Sergeant Dempsey," she said, her voice shaking. She reached out, her cool, four-fingered hand pressing against the side of his bleeding face. "Hold on. Please, you must hold on." Did we get him?" Dempsey slurred, his eyes struggling to focus on her. "You killed him. The assassin is dead," Beatrice said. She looked at the horrific damage to Dempsey's body. By all Elysian medical logic, he should have perished 10 minutes ago. The human body was fragile, yet it possessed a terrifying, almost supernatural refusal to die. "Good," Dempsey whispered, his eyes fluttering shut. "Contract fulfilled." "No!" Beatrice commanded, her voice suddenly ringing with the absolute authority of a sovereign. "I do not release you from your contract, Sergeant. Do you hear me? You are not permitted to die." The heavy, rhythmic sound of military boots echoed in the hallway outside. Flashlights cut through the lingering halon gas. "Clear! Room clear! We have friendlies!" a voice shouted. Dempsey cracked one eye open to see the familiar silhouettes of heavily armed operators wearing the UN Quick Reaction Force patches, led by Corporal Miller, whose armor was scorched and dented. "Jesus Christ. Cole," Miller breathed, dropping to his knees beside Dempsey and immediately ripping open a trauma kit. "Medic! I need a medic in here right now! We got a sucking chest wound and severe plasma burns." A team of human medics swarmed the room. Beatrice was gently but firmly pulled back as they went to work on Dempsey, plunging needles into his chest, packing his wounds, and strapping an oxygen mask over his face. "Is he going to live?" Beatrice demanded, grabbing the shoulder of the lead medic, a burly man named Peterson. Peterson didn't look up from his frantic work. "He's a stubborn son of a bitch, ma'am. He's got a chance. But we need to medevac him to the trauma center in Geneva right now." They loaded Dempsey onto a tactical stretcher. Beatrice refused to leave his side. Despite the protests of the UN security forces trying to usher her to a designated safe zone, she limped alongside the stretcher, her hand resting on the metal railing. As they emerged from the subterranean levels and into the shattered main lobby of the Palais des Nations, the full scale of the battle was evident. The UN forces had suffered heavy casualties, but they had held the line. The remaining mercenaries were either dead or zip-tied on the floor. Through the massive, shattered skylights, the wail of sirens filled the Geneva air. And descending from the clouds, flanked by a squadron of sleek silver fighter craft, was the massive, imposing form of the Elysian Royal Command ship. The cavalry had arrived, exactly an hour too late. The tarmac at the Geneva International Airport had been converted into a heavily fortified military encampment. Armored personnel carriers formed a perimeter around the medical tents, while the sky above was dominated by the silent, hovering presence of the Elysian Armada. 3 hours had passed since the assassination attempt. Inside the primary UN command tent, Queen Beatrice sat perfectly upright in a reinforced chair. Her injured leg had been treated by Elysian field surgeons who had finally arrived, sealing the wound with advanced dermal regenerators. She wore a pristine, unburnt, ceremonial robe, but her demeanor had changed. The serene, detached elegance of the alien monarch was gone. It had been replaced by something hard, cold, and forged in the fires of human violence. The flap of the tent opened. The UN Secretary-General entered, looking exhausted and pale. Beside him, flanked by human military police, was Captain Bradford of the Royal Aegis. Bradford wore his ceremonial armor, polished and glowing with the signature blue energy shield that had mysteriously failed during the attack. He looked around the room, his expression a mask of manufactured grief. He stepped forward, dropping to one knee before the Queen, bowing his head. "My sovereign," Bradford spoke, his translated voice thick with simulated emotion. "We praise the stars that you survived. When the EMP disabled our shields, tactical protocols dictated an immediate withdrawal to secure the airspace and call in the fleet. We believed you had perished in the initial blast. The grief we felt. Silence." The word was spoken softly, but it cut through the room like a razor blade. Bradford stopped, looking up. He was not used to being interrupted by the Queen. "My Queen, we." "I said silence, Captain," Beatrice commanded, her eyes burning with an intense, unyielding light. "You speak of tactical protocols. You speak of securing airspace. You speak of everything except the one duty you were bred, trained, and sworn to perform, to stand between me and death." Bradford shifted uncomfortably. The human weapons were unexpectedly. "The humans?" Beatrice stood up, towering over the kneeling captain. The UN Secretary-General took a nervous step back. "You blame the humans? You, a warrior of the Royal Aegis, clad in the most advanced armor in the quadrant, fled from primitive ballistic weapons because your shield flickered. You left me to burn on the floor of a foreign world." She walked slowly around Bradford, her voice rising in volume and intensity. "Do you know who saved my life, Captain? Do you know who dragged me through the dirt? Who bled for me? Who took plasma bolts to his own fragile flesh to ensure I drew another breath?" Bradford swallowed hard, his arrogance faltering. I was informed. A local security contractor assisted." "A human," Beatrice stated, stopping in front of him. "A fragile, unshielded, mortal human. He did not run when the math of survival turned against him. He did not calculate his own preservation. He drew a line in the blood-soaked concrete and told the assassins that they would have to go through him. He possessed a concept that our enlightened civilization seems to have entirely forgotten." "What concept, my sovereign?" Bradford asked weakly. "Loyalty," she whispered fiercely. "Loyalty that cannot be bought, programmed, or commanded. Loyalty that is proven only when the shields fall and the fires burn." Beatrice turned to the UN Secretary-General. "Lord Caldor orchestrated this attack. He provided the weaponry to the human mercenaries. He paid for my assassination." Bradford flinched. "My Queen, that is a severe accusation." "It is a fact," Beatrice snapped. "And you, Captain, were complicit. Whether you were ordered to flee by Caldor or whether your own cowardice simply made his plan easier, I do not care. You are a disgrace to the uniform you wear." She reached out and, with a swift, violent motion, ripped the gilded insignia of the Royal Aegis from Bradford's chestplate. "You are stripped of your rank, your titles, and your honor," Beatrice declared, her voice echoing through the command tent. "You will be confined to the brig of the command ship to await trial for high treason. Guards, remove this coward from my sight." Two towering Elysian soldiers, loyal to the crown, stepped forward and seized Bradford by the arms, dragging the protesting, disgraced captain out of the tent. Beatrice took a deep breath, the anger slowly receding, leaving behind a cold, absolute resolve. She looked at the Secretary-General. "Where is he?" she asked. "Sergeant Dempsey?" The Secretary-General checked a tablet in his hands. "He is in the intensive care unit at the University Hospital of Geneva. He underwent 4 hours of surgery. They had to rebuild his collarbone, repair a collapsed lung, and treat third-degree plasma burns. But he stabilized. He is awake. Take me to him." The ICU room was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the soft hum of the life support machines. Cole Dempsey lay in the center of the bed, his torso heavily bandaged, an IV line running into his right arm. His face was pale, bruised, and lined with exhaustion. The door slid open, and Queen Beatrice entered. She had left her royal entourage outside, entering the room alone. She approached the bed, her tall frame forcing her to look down at the battered soldier. Dempsey opened his eyes. It took a moment for his vision to clear. When he saw her, a faint, incredibly tired smirk crossed his lips. "Your Highness," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper, "you look less blown up than I remember." Beatrice smiled, a genuine, warm expression that rarely graced her features. "And you, Sergeant Dempsey, look exactly as stubborn as I remember." She pulled up a chair and sat beside his bed, ignoring the sterile protocols of the human hospital. She reached out, gently placing her hand over his uninjured right hand. "I came to thank you, Cole Dempsey," she said softly. You gave me back my life. You exposed a rot within my own empire that would have destroyed us all. I owe you a debt that the Ascendancy can never fully repay." Dempsey coughed slightly, wincing as the pain flared in his chest. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Constellation Security guarantees client safety. Might have to ask for a bonus this quarter, though." Beatrice chuckled softly. "Your human currency seems incredibly trivial compared to what you purchased with your blood." She paused, her expression turning serious, regal. "The Royal Aegis proved themselves unworthy of the name. They are warriors of peace, untested by true adversity. I am dissolving their command." Dempsey raised an eyebrow. "You're firing your Secret Service? Who's going to watch your back?" "That is why I am here," Beatrice said. She stood up, her posture perfectly straight. "I have negotiated a new clause in the Sol System Treaty. The Elysian Ascendancy will no longer rely solely on its own military for the protection of the crown. I am establishing a new vanguard, a joint task force." She looked directly into Dempsey's eyes. "I want you, Sergeant Dempsey. I want your unit. I want humans who understand that a shield is not made of energy, but of the unyielding will to hold the line. When you are healed, I am officially appointing you as the commander of the new Royal Aegis." Dempsey stared at her. The offer was staggering. A human private military contractor being handed the keys to the security of an interstellar monarch. It was unprecedented. It would change the political landscape of both Earth and the Ascendancy forever. He looked down at his bandages, feeling the deep ache in his bones, the lingering ghost of the plasma fire. He thought of Richter, of the cowardice of Bradford, of the absolute terror in the Queen's eyes when she was abandoned. He slowly turned his hand over, weakly gripping her long, alien fingers. "On one condition," Dempsey whispered, a hard, professional glint returning to his eyes. "Name it," the Queen replied instantly. "We do it my way," Dempsey said. "No more ceremonial armor. No more relying on energy shields that shut down when someone unplugs the router. We train them like rangers. We arm them with heavy ballistics. And if anyone looks at you sideways, we don't calculate the odds of survival. We put them in the dirt." Queen Beatrice smiled, a predatory, dangerous smile that perfectly mirrored the human soldier in front of her. "Commander Dempsey," she said, bowing her head slightly in an unprecedented show of respect, "I would expect nothing less. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and sometimes the most advanced technology in the universe is no match for the sheer, stubborn willpower of a human soldier who refuses to quit. Sergeant Cole Dempsey proved that loyalty isn't programmed into a combat suit. It's forged in blood, smoke, and sacrifice. The humans didn't just join the Galactic stage that day. They became its ultimate defenders. If you love this HFY story of grit, betrayal, and humanity showing the galaxy what true courage looks like, hit that like button to support the channel. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans who love a good underdog story where humans come out on top. Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming epic tales from the stars. Let us know in the comments, what weapon would you bring to protect the Queen? Stay strong and keep holding the line.